Today, we are taking a look at the Fantasies Week quizzes. You can find out which legendary character you mostly like in this personality quiz inspired by The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD game, available now for the Nintendo Switch. Okay, number 1. Where would you be the most excited to visit? The Isles of Songs in the Thunder Ed. What will you bring you on an adventure? Well, you go on the maps, huh? No, definitely snacks. Which activity sounds like the most fun? Well, you gotta play an instrument. What kind of room design will you fit your style? Let's say the wood-carved furniture. And finally, number 5. How will your friends describe you? Well, you got a class clown, and you will say, Groose. Groose is confident and combative, so it's no surprise that he considers Link a rival. Although Groose has a brash personality, his affection for Zelda is genuine, and he can be a loyal friend when he wants. You can learn more about Groose and the other legendary creatures in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD game for the Nintendo Switch system.
Hello, welcome back to Fantasy Week. Today we are taking a look at what are fairies. So let's get things started. The fairies of Irish myth.
What are the Irish fairies, or the Dainashi? There are a few spiritual beings that loom larger in Irish folklore and tradition than fairies, or the Dainashi. They go by many names, including
Yep, there's so many names when you do it for fairies.
The little
But I'm
people,
Kitty
as I
Fairy,
grew up here,
actually.
the Daina Beaga, and the Sluachia, the army of the sheep. They were associated with old places, from the mounds of the Neolithic to the rafts and dunes of the Iron Age. They could reside beneath the earth, within trees, streams, and fields. They could be anywhere, unseen, saved by those
the
men
things are new unseen,
But what were
but
they?
what
Should I
their
say,
eyes about to go
what are
for?
they? Firstly, let's address what the fairy folk are not. They are not the gods of the Gaels. The gods were reduced to their level by ancient storytellers, but it is quite clear that the fairy folk are in fact a lower level of spiritual entity, one identical to many others known in Indo-European religions across Europe and beyond. This
Yep,
is why
there's
they are
nowhere to
commonly
behind
referred to
you.
in English as fairies, for instance. But we could also probably add in elves or even
Listen,
dwarves into
the
the
fairies
mix.
are gone
They
on
all
ways.
seem to
Am I gonna
exist
be good?
within the same sort
Or
of
is it
sphere.
not?
Medieval people
Seems a little
understood
bit
them within a
mistaken
Christian
a
context
lot.
to have been fallen angels that
That's a pretty
existed on
tough
3
one.
separate levels: in the air, within the land and waters, and beneath the earth, dwelling with the devil. This corresponds roughly to the tripartite spatial division of the Indo-European worldview. So there are various types of these entities dwelling throughout the totality of the world, but their power
Why
and
is there hate
composition
from the
are
underworld?
thought to be largely similar.
You're supposed to do asking
To understand
yourself,
them
huh?
further, we should understand what a she is, if they are the people of it. Now, the Old Irish word she is the name given to the various mounds from ancient times, where it was believed, and rightly so in many cases, that the dead were buried. This word in turn comes from Indo-European shiste, meaning to sit, to rest, the origin for Irish sui and English sit. It would seem then that the mounds
You may
were
proceed.
named this because they were the seats of kings, or perhaps,
Am I gonna be a missing?
probably more correctly,
But
they were
here's
called
how
this
the
because
truth
that is where the ancient people were put to rest, or sat and rested in death. Thus the she, or the sheed in Old Irish pronunciation, means something like the resting place, with a possible connotation of graveyard. Sheed can also mean peace in Old Irish,
Well,
thus
rest in
demonstrating
peace.
again
As
this
always.
connotation here that these beings
But seems
are
a little
of
bit
places where
gone
people
wild.
are at peace.
Am I
Meaning
gonna be
exactly the
missing
same
sometimes?
as we mean
Anyone?
in English when we say that. Likely a euphemism for death. And indeed, it was considered very unlucky to call the fairies by name,
Oh,
which is why they were called things like fairy
That's
folk,
true.
good people. You know, these are euphemistic names.
I have no clue about
She
that.
can also refer to a type
Hey,
of
this
wind,
is a
a
secret
gust of
one.
air or sudden blast,
Is it?
which would otherwise be called something like guihe. Recall that many of these mounds also had entranceways, passages inside them, like Newgrange for instance. If one stands before the entrance of such a passage or cave, because of the temperature differential, one can feel often a breeze upon them that was likely thought to emanate from within the cave, or the passageway from the underworld. There are various references to the Danashi linked to the wind, even with tornadoes and dust devils being referred to as fairy gusts.
Oh,
The
very
reason
dust.
they are so associated
fairy
with the wind
dust.
has
You
to
gotta
do
make
with
you
their
a
spiritual,
sparkle.
or one might say ghostly, nature. In Indo-European thought, the wind and air was closely tied
Pretty
to, if
tough
not
one,
identical
huh?
to, the spirit.
Am
Such
I
that
gonna
the
be a
human
fairy
force
this
of
time?
life, or what was
But
thought
definitely,
as part
yeah,
of the
but
soul, was
who
viewed
cares?
as wind in all Indo-European beliefs. Latin, for instance, uses the word animus, for soul, and this word refers to breath or wind, from Proto-Indo-European hanha, meaning breath, which gives rise to Greek animos, meaning wind or breeze, and Old Irish anim, meaning soul or life. And in modern Irish, this is used to mean name. Now, this meaning is directly equivalent to the Tocharian B, where anma means soul or self.
Oh,
So thus, the very core
That's a
of the
pretty
human
good
being,
myth
its
on that
spiritual
story.
essence, was wind or breath. So the nature of the fairies is also akin to that of breath. They are beings of air or spirit, and thus they move through the air, and can likewise control the air. When a person died, it was thought that their spirit was also moved through the air, being air itself.
oh
This
my
is also
goodness.
akin to
That's a
later
good old
myths
spirit
of people
this
being
time.
abducted by fairies, disappearing into their world never to be seen again. And where have they gone? And what is their world? It is the
But that world
of
is
the dead,
beneath us,
the world of
too.
the spirit, detached from physical
I
form,
don't know
a
what
type
that
of
is.
shadow world that mirrors our
I
own,
think we're about
which
to
is quite how the
get
fairy
one.
world is described in various sources. They are perhaps most akin to ghosts, but with the caveat that they are not generally considered to be spirits
Not
of the dead,
generally done.
but are spiritual beings.
How the
in
heck supposed to
origin.
when you want
They
to
are
know
a
that
type
part?
of minor level
know what they
deity, you
say?
could say. But
You
as
go
the
believe
fair
this.
folk are not high gods of the celestial realm, they do not exist within that heavenly realm, and they play a sort of intermediary role. The fairy host, the Sluigshia, were said to be led on various occasions by none other than Luag Lawada. When we realize the spiritual nature of these entities,
Oh,
and that the Sloichia
really?
were strongly connected to winds, it is possible that this is referring to a similar phenomena as the wild hunt in continental sources. It may well be that the fairy host here is thought of as the storm winds, whereas the spear of Lugh is a lightning blast.
Well, I don't know.
There is a great
about
description of this host
Am I
given
gonna
in
be
an
seriously
Irish
out of
poem
trouble
dedicated
with
to them,
these
and it goes,
ones?
"White shields they carry in their hands, with emblems of pale silver, with glittering blue swords, with mighty stout horns.
Wow,
In
mighty horns like
well-devised battle
unicorns.
array, ahead of their fair chieftain, they march amid blue spears, pale visaged, curly-headed bands.
Now
They
that's
scatter
when
the
I heard a
battalions
problem
of the
in
foe.
here.
They ravage
But
every
you're gonna
land
take a
they
look at
attack.
what mystery one I never
Splendidly
thought.
they march to combat, a swift, distinguished, avenging host. No wonder, though their strength be great, sons of queens
Well,
and
isn't
kings
it
are one and
funny
all.
when I'm talking to?
On their heads are
But
beautiful
I'm
golden
going
yellow
away
manes,
and see
with
how
smooth,
it
curving
does.
bodies, with bright blue starred eyes, with pure crystal teeth and thin red lips. Good they
Oh,
are, like man's
how's very mythical
melodious in
creature
the
what
alehouse,
this is.
masterly
Am I
at
gone
making
birds now?
songs, skilled
maybe.
at playing fiddle. And as you can see from that description, they in fact are very similar to the sort of personality or character that comes through about Lugh himself. So the fair folk can bring luck, and they can also bring disease and death.
Oh.
In various stories, they escort people
Well,
into
that's
the
too much
underworld,
diseases when you
and so
get
they may
sick.
play a role in bringing souls of
Oh,
the dead
yeah,
after
yeah.
death, carrying them away on the wings
I
perhaps.
think there might be
However,
good
they
ones.
were also thought to seek
A
people's
good old
deaths
fairy.
on occasions, hitting them with fairy spears or arrows to cause them maladies and death, where they would claim them in the fairy world when they died.
Fairy world.
Joint inflammation
As I'm
and many other
suggesting.
illnesses were ascribed to them. Even leprosy was said to be caused by them. The actions of these fairy darts
Well, there's
is
no belief in
similar
action
to
with
the power
that.
ascribed early on
Am I gonna be
in Greek
guessing
myth
or not?
to the arrows of
Did
Apollo.
I?
Sometimes it was thought that certain stones, especially quartz, and also Stone Age arrows or axe heads, were actually fairy darts, and these were kept by people who were known as fairy doctors who
Oh,
would
people.
chant while
I
performing
have
rituals
no
with
making
these
sense
objects,
of this.
waving them over the person thought to be afflicted by a fairy dart in order to heal them. And others were kept buried under people's homes sometimes,
there's
or
buried on
buried
that.
under barns. Traditionally, offerings were made to the fairies of biscuits, bread, cakes, milk, and other small offerings. It was thought that they were especially protective of ancient sacred sites, and to disturb these places would be to bring ruin upon the ones who did. When in the early 19th century archaeological discoveries were made of masses of gold, people considered it to be fairy gold and warned of danger to anyone associated with it. Even more recently, these concerns were expressed at various times
Ooh.
with road construction projects that cut into
How's
or
those
near
other
ancient
projects on
sites.
that fairy thing?
Now there are many different types of
Some
ace
fairy
sheet
tale
or
things?
Dina sheet,
No, fairy things.
and each one should really have its own video. There's too much to get into in one.
Oh,
But this is meant to give an
I'm
overview
so
of sort
bored
of what
and
they
don't
are in
know when.
origin. And they are spirit beings akin to air or wind. But there are three major types as mentioned. The fairies of the air, which manifests as gusts of wind and even storm winds, and are presented as warriors in a great cavalcade of horsemen. There are those of the land and waters, which reside in localized places such as trees or ancient
didn't do
sites and
anything.
mounds, streams and lakes.
what about
And there are
that?
those who dwell
Am
in
I
the
gonna
dark
be a
and
fairy
deep
now?
places. The fairies of the air and land were thought to be beautiful and marvelous, and to create sweet music. If only they were appeased
Oh
by
my
humans or left alone.
goodness.
in
It's
their
gone
sight
now.
Undisturbed, They would be peaceful or would even help people at some times. But those of the dark were thought to be willfully evil and were equated with Christian demons. So I'd like to give a big thanks to my Patreon subscribers.
Well, that's it for the fairies. I think we'll come back tomorrow for another fantasy week. See you sometimes. Bye-bye.
Well, goodbye everybody. Have a good summer.
Yay!